I don't know about you all, but the breakout group I was in was really amazing and inspiring. And I'd like to do is spend a few minutes, and people can either use the chat box or preferably if they're willing to raise their hand, and maybe Carrie can help me identify people who would like to share one of the stories, obviously a little briefly. And then what we're going to do is we're going to talk about whether that story can be looked at through the frame of the 4 building blocks of hope, to sort of see how this is already working in Idaho. Does anybody want to go first?
I will, if that's okay.
Thank you. Yes.
So our group kind of talked about the sort of positive things that have come out of our new dependence upon technology. So that at the beginning of this process, I heard someone call the time before COVID the land before time. So in the land before time, we had been very sort of averse to it. We thought it would put a barrier between us and people. But necessity has shown us that actually it's an opportunity to potentially reach more people. And we had a couple stories of how that has happened.
Great. Any other stories? Thank you.
Hi, this is Shannon. I'll share. The amazing thing about all of the stories is flexibility and resilience to meet the needs where our families and children are. Being creative, stepping back and looking at what we used to do, what we need to do, and then just doing it.
That's great.
I think Pat Stevens in our group had a great story, and she's from Ontario, Oregon. Pat, you want to tell your story?
Did you just throw Pat under the bus?
Not a bus.
It was a great story. She was struggling though with the audio, I think. Let's see where she's at.
It was an amazing story.
Somebody want to share it with us, or should we go on?
Yeah, could someone tell it?
Yeah.
There's Pat. She opened.
Am I in?
Yeah.
We're in now.
I'm having a terrible time talking. Well, we're the Relief Nursery in Ontario, Oregon, and we're one of 20 in the state of Oregon. We used to have children that come to therapeutic classrooms, and we do home visiting to do our parent education piece. So we are closed because of the COVID-19, and but we are working on an emergency license. So we're having kids come in and do respite care once a week, and we're bringing them in one at a time, family wise. And at some point when we very first got started with doing respite and doing the virtual home visits, we decided to do a parade in Ontario. So we have a bus that brings the kids here, and all of the staff got into the bus and a couple of cars so that we were safe, social distancing. And we drove to each child's house and sang the Wish You Well song to them and gave them a pinwheel. So it was very touching to see how everybody came out to visit with us and at social distancing. And when we got to one of the houses, they had made a big sign that said, "Thank you, Relief Nursery, for coming to visit us."
Oh.
Very touching.
So I know Robin Allen had her hand up.
Okay, sorry, I had to find my unmute button. So what I shared is that I'm a social work professor at Boise State. And one of the things and I coordinated the undergraduate social work program for many years. And one of the things that we have done is we've admitted folks with past criminal history and drug addiction issues. And we've seen many of them go on to become clinical social workers working at health and welfare with abused and neglected children. And, you know, it's folks that have come down from the lowest point of their lives that are now out there giving back and helping. And also props to our social work licensing board, which will consider people with felonies as licensed social workers. And so I think that's a great model of resilience.
That's really beautiful. And I think it so goes to what we were talking about earlier in the first session about the ability of people to heal and seeing their strengths and pulling them out, in addition to seeing them as people with problems. They're not defective people. They're people who have problems, overcome them. That's just amazing. So I think as Holly Whitworth raised her hand.
Let's see. Am I unmuted?
You are.
I think I am. Okay. In our group, the thing that struck me is we had a wide range of people and the roles that they played in supporting families during COVID. But the thing that struck me is there were relationships that were strengthened with home visiting, within organizations, Chloe Yang, who's one of your staff, talked about how there in Boston, they had a lot of organizations that were partnering and coming together. We had a person who does navigation for the state of Idaho and talked about the partnering of organizations coming together and working together. So for me, the things that stood out were those relationships that were strengthened and fortified even over Zoom because services had to change. And then also that organizations have been working together more. So I think that that's an important thing in times of trauma, organizing relationships and also organizing resources for families.
Yeah. These are just amazing stories. And Holly, thank you for pointing out the building block of relationship. And when I was listening to Pat Stevens' story and the family that put the sign up and the parade, what does that say about community engagement? And those kids are going to remember these were like really crazy, weird times. But I remember we did a parade, and people were happy to see us, and I'm sure the kids brought joy to everyone who was watching. So that sense of engagement can start really early. What I'd like to do is go and just say a few things that are on our website, and I think these are really going to resonate. Humans adapt to COVID. There have been drive-by birthdays. Kids have been visiting the retirement community to see grandparents. And I don't know if you guys have seen this, but on the web, you can get instructions for making a hug contraption. So you can hug somebody and not actually touch them or breathe on them. People are amazing. So I think overall, and so many of the stories really talked about how creative people have been. And one of the libraries we heard about in group 8 has virtual story time, and they figured out how to get story kits to families to take care of this. Anna Hanningham, who wrote on a blog on our website, doing art is a universally accessible way for youth to transcend the assumption that they're invisible. We all need to feel like we belong in a space where other people accept us, where our lives and identities matter. And in my neighborhood, people have put things up on the windows, and some kids have started painting rocks with cute, like we have a rock in our yard that appeared one day, it looked a lot like a strawberry because it had been painted by some kids. So, and they put it next to a little sculpture of a rabbit. So anyway, lots of things going on, people contributing in that way. And the pandemic has caused me to think about how I might balance my work and life better, because the time spent with my children has been rewarding. It's not about disconnection, it's about reconnection. And has re-energized a new way of us living to one another that's been so impactful to the relationship overall. And I know that many people have personal stories of what's happened in their families as they've dealt with the emotional roller coaster of sort of despair when this first started and figuring it out. And I think that there's a lot of that going on. I hope so. So going to organizational transformation. And I know that you guys do strengthening families, so this is a part of what you do. It's not all of what you do. But one thing that in many organizations that use evidence-based programs, they screen for problems. So whether it's ACEs or depression or substance use, I think most of us are familiar with that, and most people in this room have trained people to do that, develop policies for accountability for that, and monitor how, make sure everyone gets screened and that positive screens get referred to therapy. So this is a good thing because people have real problems and there are real therapies that you can use to address it. And my mind always goes to depression, which is very common and very treatable. But what we're doing and what we'd like to talk about as far as organizational transformation is also identifying protective factors and strengths. And I think it was Robin who talked about training people with complicated histories, finding their strengths, and then creating opportunities for engagement. And Pat talked about celebration, a little parade down the street. And these offer opportunities to strengthen the protective factors. So these can be the strengthening families protective factors. For example, many teenagers around the country have helped deliver food to elderly people or people for whatever reason can't get their own food. So if you think about that, that's the strengthening families promotive factor of concrete support in times of need. But for the individual teenager who's doing it, it's also that sense of engagement and building the sense that they themselves matter in their communities. So this is the view of organizational transformation that we're trying to accomplish and that we'll be talking about during this session. So think for a minute first about existing resources. So first of all, and we saw this when we had 250 people in the other room, they're an amazing group of people in Idaho who are delivering services. They're trained, they have, remember the word cloud from the beginning, they have an enormous sense of compassion and empathy, commitment and understanding. And many of them have been trained in the strengthening families protective factors. Looking over Roger's shoulder, I think the SF and the SFTI is strengthening families. There you go, it is. So they know about that. Many have been trained in trauma-informed care. They also have their work experience from the families they've seen. And the exercise we did at the beginning where we shared stories, all of the direct service providers also have stories of families that inspire them. And it's pretty fun, actually, and inspiring to give them a chance to tell some of those stories because professionally, we spend most of our time on the problems. And we kind of lose track of what else is going on. And then many people, okay, I think actually all of us have lived experience of some sort. But we bring to it our own stuff. And that's sort of, these are some of the strengths that already start and are already there for existing resources. But now what we're going to do is we're going to go through the building blocks of hope and figure out what new content related to hope would help augment the existing human resources. So these are the 4 building blocks of hope. We've talked about them. Relationships, safe relationships we talked about. Safe, equitable, and stable living, playing, and learning environments. Engagement, and opportunities for social and emotional development. So I want to start and talk about relationships. And there's so much we can talk about here. But one of the things that I would like to sort of lead off with, and I'm going to open the chat box for more suggestions, is remembering that parental mental and physical health promotes child development. And I think all of us know of parents or have seen parents who think that they can sort of put themselves and their lives in the refrigerator for a few years while they devote everything to their child. And it actually kind of backfires, doesn't it? In the picture, you can see this mom and daughter both doing yoga. But I think that one of the things that we can offer through our programs is time and permission for self-care, particularly attention to healthcare, including mental health, dental care, promoting activities that we know improve health, like exercise, mindfulness, and sleep. And finally, I think promoting relationships with supportive individuals. So a lot of people are already starting to use the chat box. And Chloe, I know you're in the room somewhere. Are you able to read the chat box?
Sure. Can
Thank
read
you.
them as they come in.
See, someone said it's not selfish doing self-care. Do you want to let us know either by unmuting yourselves or in the chat box things you've done to promote parental wellness?
So we have Shannon. How we do self-care, we are modeling self-care to the young people in our lives. So not only for yourself, but modeling it for young people. Thank you, Shannon. You had someone said that self-care is a radical act from Roger. Yes, thank you. Especially in these really uncertain times, taking time for self-care can be a really radical and is a radical act. Kathy Johnson, noticing the things parents do well and telling them. Thank you, Kathy. From Margaret, encourage people to take the time for themselves. From Jennifer, reminding people that you can't pour from an empty cup. We have to take care of ourselves in order to better support our students and clients. That's such a good metaphor. Thank you, Jennifer.
I'm going to steal that or borrow it, use it. It's great.
And from Callie, promoting and modeling meditation. From Taisha, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, assisting parents to find childcare so that they have the capacity and bandwidth to focus on themselves. From Audra, trying to find barriers our organization creates and try to reduce or eliminate them. Example, fines and fees on library books, especially during COVID. Thank you, Audra, for bringing in sort of that institutional piece. The ways that institutions can figure out how they can best support parent wellness and facilitate others' self-care. From Amanda, giving parents ideas on social distance self-care. A lot of people think you have to go to the gym and remind them of things to do in the community where they can feel safe. Thank you, Amanda. So drawing on community strengths. From Florina, in our parenting support group, we do an entire meeting on building self-esteem and self-care. We work on giving and receiving compliments and talk about what we currently do to care for ourselves because we can't care for others if we are not caring for ourselves. That's wonderful, the parenting support group, and I guess also tying back into the empty cup metaphor, we can't care for others if we are not caring for ourselves. From Jane, provide flexible work schedules, encourage breastfeeding and the time/place to make that a good experience, share family hoorays among staff, celebrate small wins and shifts in perception. Thank you, Jane. So bringing together also individual things you can do, institutional things, organizational things, changes like the flexible work schedules. These are really great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. I just want to just notice that I think you did too, that we seamlessly went from supporting families to supporting the people who work with us and in our organizations. And what an important shift to make, to recognize that just the way that organizational culture really matters here. And I think there's never been a time where it's more important to figure out. I know for myself, it took a while to feel grounded in a new routine and to get myself to exercise again and all of those things, because it just seemed everything was topsy-turvy, and it feels better now. And I think that promoting that, it's always been important, and parents always sacrifice for their kids, but sometimes mistake not taking care of themselves as really promoting their child's health when they're exactly related. And I'm going to use that empty cup metaphor forever now. The second building block of hope I want to talk about is the environment. So children need safe, equitable, and stable environments to live, learn, and play. And these can be positive environments at home, positive environments at school. And so this is a picture from the Idaho Visitor Bureau website, and it really illustrates that you can create positive experiences without money. And Idaho apparently has lots of beautiful, beautiful places. And you can get out, and someone commented in the comment section, you don't have to go to the gym to get exercise. So I think that one of the things, and people have touched on this, is concrete supports. They're kind of the basis, the floor of Maslow's hierarchy, making sure people have food, housing, and heat. But also in thinking about creating a safe environment in a child's home, we believe that a safe environment for a kid is a home where there's effective discipline, so kids learn right from wrong, but without being afraid of physical punishment or belittling statements from their parents. And I think for some parents, particularly if they reflect on their own childhood and didn't experience this, this can require a lot of teaching to understand how to do this. I touched on opportunities to be in nature and safe and equitable school environments. And so, this was written in the before COVID times, and it really talked about the social environment at school and how teachers themselves can be supported by other teachers and by their administration, and how that translates down into the way students treat each other. But now with COVID, there's a whole nother meaning to safe and equitable school environments that we can talk about. But with these as ideas, I'd like to open the chat box again and allow people, thank you for doing it last time, and other ideas that you have at your organizational level that you could implement to help the children and families in your community experience safe, stable, and equitable environments to live, learn, and play. So Robin, you did your dissertation on family-centered practice. Can you talk a little bit about it? Probably want to unmute yourself.
There we go.
There you go.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I'm slow with the cursor. Yeah, so I did my dissertation on family-centered practice and birth to 3 programs, and this is a few years ago. So I'll have to stretch back in my memory. But what I discovered and I did qualitative research. So I did in-depth interviews with practitioners, social workers in birth to 3 programs, working with families with kids with disabilities, and the director of the agency. And what I found is that agencies that did not have family-centered practices for their employees, or actually didn't really buy into the notion of family-centered practice with families, their employees had really high rates of burnout. They just felt stressed, depressed, anxiety. On the other hand, agencies where they really embraced the notion of family-centered practice and believed in it and did it for their clients and their employees, the employees felt like they were part of a team. They felt valued. They weren't depressed. They were supported. They worked collaboratively. And so, I just think, again, it's not a research study that you can make predictions about other programs, but I do think that it's a theme that resonates, that makes a certain amount of sense if we treat our employees well, with dignity and with a family-centered model, that they're going to be better able to serve their clients in that same model.
Robin, that's great.
I can go on.
That's great. I know there's a lot of research in elementary and high schools in particular that really shows that the way staff feel treated and treat each other definitely bleeds into how children behave and how they're treated. So really important concept. And again, I like the way this group moves right from families to what we need to do to create the organizational culture that supports it. So the next building block of hope is engagement. And this is from the Star Idaho website. And you see a parade. And we heard about a parade from a respite place, respite childcare. But we know that youth engaged in their communities thrive.
I want to go to.
Yes, Jan? That organizationally, to connect with ethnic, faith, neighborhood, and workplace communities that already exist. Some organizations have either nature adventures or family fun days. I know that in my breakout groups, we heard about some libraries that provided supports for that so people could feel engaged. And that it's possible to connect with activities at church. And we noticed in the picture exercise we do that many of you noticed that having a spiritual connection is a support, and their community groups. And finally, and I think this came out again, and you can comment on this in the chat box, is the participants in our programs often will know what's going on in the community and can help with the engagement part. I gotta save this chat box. These are great. So what I'd like to do is sort of think about this as organizations in a way need to be less self-contained and more part of the community so that engagement can involve that. Many organizations will already have like a parent advisory council or some other ways for parents to be engaged, but also thinking about being a place where we can find out about other sources of engagement in the neighborhood and those other social supports in their area. And Jax, I think you raised a really important point. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? They said it's important to be aware of the potential damages that communities can have. And do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Sure. As someone who is gender nonconforming and queer, I have received a lot of damage. I'm still undoing a lot of religious trauma that was inflicted upon me all throughout my upbringing, and refinding spirituality presently and what that means to me now as an adult, which, you know, kind of jettisons back to that ability for our brains to heal and for us to be able to actually like become trauma-informed individuals. But while we present the image that being involved in community groups or faith groups or church groups can most certainly bring engaged connections between people, unfortunately for those of us within marginalized groups, it can also oftentimes bring about a lot of trauma that takes years and years to undo.
Well, I think that's such an important point. And I wonder if people want to comment about how you can organizationally both be open to the community and also aware of the potential trauma or re-traumatization that it can cause. Jax, thank you so much for bringing that up. I know it's hard sometimes to bring up your own personal experience.
This is Robin again. Sorry, I'm a talker. I actually do research on this. People who are non-believers and have left religion. And there is a great deal of trauma and abuse that happens to people who come out to their families, and the language of GLBT populations has been co-opted by the non-believing community as a way of talking. But when people come out as not believing in their family's religion, they can experience all kinds of abuse and poor treatment. Again, I've done qualitative interviews with people who have had been literally kicked out of the home when they've announced that to their families, lost all of their family relationships completely. You know, the decision to come out as non-religious, they lost their community, their friends, they basically become shunned and lose everything. The thing I would say on the resilience piece of that is that everybody I've ever interviewed has no regrets at their choice to decide to leave religion and their beliefs in God. And another little point that I'll add in is that there is a group of people who are neither religious nor spiritual. And we have to be careful and not assume that either of those things is going to be helpful for all people. And for some people, it's a great source of support and help in times of trauma and crisis. But for other people, it just triggers the trauma and the crisis. And so we need to just, again, let our clients tell us what their experiences are and not make assumptions that spirituality is and religion is something for everyone. And again, I can go on forever, but I'll stop now.
No, I'm wondering, as we're talking about, if there are people who have experience in finding other ways for individuals to be engaged, so if they're gender non-conforming or have other issues with the traditional community, there are communities out there that are either more accepting or have people with similar personal experiences. So that being engaged with your community doesn't necessarily mean being engaged with the mainstream community. I think we're bringing out a lot of things that are really important to discuss. That the idea of being engaged, so you feel that you're part of something bigger than you, and that you matter to other people, is really important. And if the traditional community, like the church you were brought up in, doesn't have space for you, it doesn't mean that hunger for engagement isn't there. So I think that that's one of the things, and we've heard so much pain around this issue because you feel like you ought to be engaged, but you're not. So another thing that we can work on programmatically might be identifying a variety of ways, again, in a non-judgmental fashion, that there people might be able to find that engagement. And Jax, thank you for bringing this up. And I think that it's a perfect example because you've engaged with this group, and I think we've all learned a lot about just the language that we use in describing engagement and being careful so that the language we use to describe the positive experience of engagement doesn't inadvertently exclude people, because that's not the intent. Finally, opportunities for social and emotional development. And this happens a lot through playing with peers. And this comes from the Mountain Home Air Force Base. I think there's some people from that area here. And this is hard to recreate during the period of COVID, but just the idea that children learn about social and emotional development. Some children need more help than others. Professionally, there are ways to assess how people are doing this, but the children who have the most trouble, in my experience as a pediatrician, are children whose parents are so worried about outside influences or the dangers or something else that they keep their children in a very restricted environment, and they don't have a chance to play with other kids, even though sometimes it's not the most fun, to say the least, but they can't work that out. And obviously there are problems for different kids in negotiating this, but in general, there's a lot that can be done to create environments. One school district where I spoke, they had a program where from time to time, and I think it was once a month, but I could be making that up, they had a social worker who came into the third grade classes after recess and basically talked with the kids about what happened at recess, so that you can move from what happened even to a third grade mind to understanding the social emotional development and consequences and taking that apart. And I think the kids really got a lot from that because they could step back a little bit from it. And at that age, they're still really there. So I want to move on from this. And again, we're going to go into small groups. But before this, for those of you who have a pen and pencil or a phone with a note function, we've been talking a lot, or you've been listening to each other and to me. And if you come with 5 ideas, come with 5, maybe 4, or maybe 3, 2, 1 really good idea, I'd like you to take, and we'll do like 5 minutes now, to think about what you've learned so far in the earlier session and in this session, and what you want to do this fall, what resources you might need to do it, and what challenges you'll face. And then to let you give a little preview of coming attraction, we're then going to talk about it in small groups, and then we're going to do the chat box or speaking again. But I want everyone to leave with some ideas that they're going to do, maybe not tomorrow because the conference is all week, right? But and not Monday because that's Labor Day and it's a holiday, but Tuesday that you guys are going to do. So think about it, and not to be super fleshed out. This is more brainstorming than actual planning. We'll get a little bit later to some more planning stuff. So take a pen and paper, and if I was able to, I would play calm, soothing music, so you can imagine that. And I'll set a timer. Again, you can do it. So remember, the assignment is to think of a few ideas, and then to some extent, as much as you can, think about the resources you have and that you will need, and what challenges you would face as you start to do this. Okay, I'm going to start wrapping up. And Carrie, in a minute or so, do you want to move people again into groups of 4 or 5?
Yes, perfect. I'm ready to push you into rooms when you're ready.
Okay. I think people looking around the screen, I think people are mostly ready. So let's go ahead and do that. And again, we'll spend about 10 minutes in those groups, and that would give us enough time to come back together and to make our plans.
Great. Don't forget that you can ask for help. You can invite me in if you need anything technologically, and you also have the ability to leave a room. So here we go.
Hi, Carrie. Are you able to randomly put me in a different room? It's kind of fun to flit around.
I am. Any remembrance of what room you were in? If not, I'll just pick one.
I was in 9.
Okay. Let's see. All right, here we go. Did you get a message to join?
Nope.
Nope. I moved you to 3. There we go. Let me try another one here.
If not, I can just sit here and meditate, which is fine, actually.
Okay, let me see if no, for some reason I'm not able to. Sorry. I'm still trying.
How are we doing on time?
1 minute remaining.
Perfect. Welcome back.
All rooms are closed. We should all be back into the main meeting room now.
Great, thank you. So I hope you all enjoyed your small groups and had a chance to process it. We have time for maybe 3, 4, 5 people to tell us some of their ideas, just to get a sense of what we're thinking about, and then we'll bring it all home. So would anyone like to be the first lucky volunteer, either to speak or in your chat box?
So this is Cindy Richardson from North Idaho, and I manage home visiting programs through our local health district. And one of the things that I said is next week where I'm actually doing the people I take care of are my staff. They're the frontline people who are doing home visiting with young families. So next week we're doing a lunch and learn with a retired physician who's a behavioral health specialist, and to talk about kind of secondary trauma just normally involved in their work, but also the additional secondary trauma that they're now experiencing because of the pandemic and the challenges that they're facing because of that. So it's really just going to be an informal group discussion, but being led by a professional to help them kind of reflect on those things. So that's really great. And then the one thing I really want to focus on is bringing more reflection and fun to our team meetings. I find that what it turns into is a time where I present all the administrative stuff that I need to let them know about. But I think that I would like to incorporate more time for us to explore each other as individuals by doing more fun and reflective activities in that team meeting as well.
Great. It's a wonderful idea. There's a whole management concept called appreciative inquiry, which is a little complicated, but it really starts from just where you said. And it's so important to do that. And the other thing that I've heard, and I don't know whether you're experiencing it, Cindy, or other people are, because maybe home visitors are in a different situation, but for school teachers, when they're doing video lessons, they're seeing inside the homes of their children and their students, and they're somewhat surprised and taken aback by the situations that their kids come from. And I think when you deal with people who come to you and get to present themselves the way they want, it can be a little bit shocking to see the video. So the secondary trauma is really, really important to think about. And I love the ideas of having fun as a staff. Other comments or ideas that came up in your meetings? So Roger, go ahead, please.
I get really energized by thinking through a systems lens. And so my plan is to consider what I already have in place that is a strength, and then what in my systems will I need to fortify, looking through that lens of hope. But I also think big picture, I'm a very visual thinker, so I'm thinking, well, what am I aiming for by doing that? And I very much aim to be preventative in my work. And so I want to visualize for myself that I'm normalizing prevention.
Great. And maybe one other person, Kathy? Okay.
There is a chat from Florina, which is a response to Cindy. She said at the beginning of our staff meetings, we always do a check-in question. They're silly. Like, if you were an animal, what would you be and why? And at the end, we always discuss what we are doing for self-care, which I feel promotes practicing self-care because you share what you're doing with others.
That's a wonderful idea. Chloe, maybe we should do that at our staff meetings, wherever you are on my screen. I like that. So I just want to mention before we go into the next part of what we're doing, that the other session that Dina's leading, that you may have staff people attending, they're really going through in a series of exercises, sort of similar to what we've done now, but really focused on the phases of care. So how you do an initial assessment in a way that frames the kind of risk that you're finding out about in a way that also includes strengths, and not just generally like, oh, look how your baby loves you, but thinking, which is true, babies love their parents, but also thinking about asking enough, probing enough to find out whether people are engaged in their communities, whatever that community is, what they're doing, whether their home environment is safe, what they're doing for that, and a little bit about ideas for how they promote the relationship with their children, so that you can have a sense as a provider from the very moment when you meet somebody with what their strengths, coping skills, and resilience are. And just like we've been talking a little bit about the 4 building blocks and opportunities to create them, that session has been talking about how to develop experiences, whether it's just going to the playground and playing with your little kid, to creating opportunities for youth engagement, creating those positive experiences within the program. And then we talked about, and that group is also going to talk about how you talk with someone who's experienced trauma, and borrowing from narrative therapy, starting out with a question, tell me about some time when things went well for you. And then using that as a way to really help people bring their resources, whether they're community resources or internal resources, as a basis to start solving their self-identified problems or problems that were identified through that relationship. So I think the other thing, and the reason I mention that, is that another way to think about this organizationally is what sort of training or experiences do you want to bring to your frontline staff so they can begin to using the framework of positive childhood experiences and their health outcomes in the work they do, assessing people, talking with them, and then reflecting on how well their practice is. And I think it really picks up on what Malia said, Maria said, somebody said, systems are put in place to serve people, not people serving the systems. And I think that goes for us and also for the people that we work to serve. What do they bring to it? What do they already have? So what I'd like you to do is think about how to work to create opportunities within your work. And there were several suggestions that we heard about opportunities for the staff, for engagement, finding joy, making that connection and celebration. And I'm going to hold that image of those little kids doing a parade in my head for a long time. But how do you celebrate things? And how do you, there's a lot to celebrate in life, fortunately. And how do you bring those out and make those connections that really matter? And one technique that people have used for this are creating SMART aims. SMART aims are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. So when you're making a plan for the next 90 days after leaving this meeting, is it specific? Do you understand? Are you able to articulate to other people what you're trying to do and what the single focus is? Is it measurable? Will you know if you've made improvements. Is it realistic? Because, I wake up in the morning and I want to change the entire world. And then I end up saying, well, at least I can get through my emails today. So somewhere in there, there's some realism, making sure you're aiming high enough, but not too low. Is it relevant? Does it matter to you? Is this the right time to do it? Is the environment where you're working? And ideally, people will leave this 3-day meeting jazzed up. This might be a really right time to do it. And we all know that in the environment, people are hungry for some level of change because things are kind of messed up. And time bound. I'm not saying do it immediate, do it tomorrow, but also not say when we get around to it. So here's some examples.
Dr. Sege,
yes,
I hate to interrupt. I'm wondering if you wanted to share your screen. You have lots of good words on your, yep.
Oh, thank you. Okay. So I could see it. These are the SMART aims that we talked about: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. I'm sorry, I wasn't projecting those. And then here's some samples. So one might be before the end of September, a group of stakeholders will develop a work plan to update our intake forms. Our intake forms often have a lot of issues around risk in them, but maybe you want to add some more questions about those positive childhood experiences that we talked. If you're screening for ACEs, do you also want to screen for PCEs? So I marked it in yellow that this one is time-bound before the end of September. And then before the end of next week, I will debrief with the staff who attended today's session and identify key action steps. So this is measurable because you'll know by a week from Friday if you've identified key action steps. Now, they may be ones that need further exploration, but if you just debrief without having a measurable outcome, it may not lead anywhere. So having that measurable outcome. And the third one, and this is for people who are supervising direct care people. I know a lot of people in this room are doing that. Beginning with supervision meeting next Monday, which is actually Tuesday because it's a holiday, I'll ask about family strengths during at least 3 case presentations. So this is realistic, right? You may not be able to ask about it in all of them. Sometimes people have too long a problem list or your time is running short. But if you can do it at 3 case presentations, then you'll start to teach yourself how to do it. So I'd encourage people, each of you, your call to action is to make a SMART aim for yourself. You can do it during lunch or some other time, but make a SMART aim that's specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound, so that when you leave this meeting, you'll not only remember that was a great talk about hope, this is a great talk about hope, and I wrote down somewhere that I can retain what it is I want to do. So finally, what I'd like to do is give you a moment either in the chat box, and we have really until about 2:05, so not a lot, 12:05, not a lot of time to do it, but to think for a moment about what is the most important thing you learned today. And if anybody wants to shout it out, just a brief shout out what you learned in the sessions today, that would be great. And then we're going to move to just one last thing before we finish at 2:15, 12:15, or 11:15. So hope is achievable and it exists. Yay! Oh, sorry. Love the hope. And we can't see your slides. Oh, I'm sorry. Hope comes in many forms. Thank you. Positive childhood experiences can help mitigate adverse childhood experiences. Remembering to focus on the positive and strengths. Reminder to do that. Positive childhood experiences trump ACEs. So we don't want to have any political conversations here, but they can't overpower adverse childhood experiences. Sorry.
We use conquer.
Okay. Yeah, my parents used to play bridge, and I remember when my mother said, "I'll help you when I'm the dummy," to my older sister. My older sister, "Mom, you're not the dummy." So anyway, hope is a flexible concept and used at all levels of helping. So this is great. And what I want to leave you with today are those thoughts, but remember that improvements through SMART aims begin with small tests of change. Think of different stakeholders, and we talked a lot about your staff, which is great. You can get opinions from parents through things beyond attendance, but also satisfaction surveys, and of course, that they recommend services to their friends. We've talked quite a bit about the opinion and satisfaction of frontline workers, and of course, we all need to please management and funders. So that I'm hoping that the information you have today will enable you to go to your boards and say, what we're doing is not only what I feel in my heart, but it's evidence-based, it's effective, and Roger Sherman said we should do it.
There you go.
So, so I'm going to go back to how we build hope during COVID-19. And it's important for us all to recognize that children will remember these days. And my mother was a depression child, and she remembered those times, those days for her whole life. Other people certainly remember big events like when John F. Kennedy was assassinated or when 9/11 happened. And those are big formative events in kids' lives. And in the work that we're all doing, one of the things that's always a top focus is how we prevent adverse childhood experiences. So as families get stressed economically through all of the other disruptions that are going on, how do we keep the kids safe from abuse and neglect? And the outreach and some of the stories of inspiration that we heard as a large group, and especially in the small groups, think of those and think of all the work that everyone in our communities is doing to prevent adverse childhood experiences during these times. We can also create positive experiences. And I think that in some of those stories of inspiration, there's kind of some magic going on too, where children realize how treasured they are, where adults realize how important their partners are to them in this point, and hold on to those. And those are the stories that we need to train ourselves to think about and embracing the magic. And what I want to leave you with is the goal is to make superhighways in our brain, to think about the positives so often that our brains literally reform themselves. So those connections where when we see a scene, we think about the strengths become fast and like highways, and we can make those connections for ourselves and reflect those stories back to our staff, our patients, and clients. And here's how you do it. First of all, you have to be mindful of the positive. And people talk about mindfulness a lot. There are many ways to do it, but just train yourself, as we did in that cartoon, to when you see a scene or a family or something else, to be mindful of the positive as well as the training we've all had to see the risks and problems. Second, and this is more a self-care thing, but see and hear beauty. There are many ways to do this. During the early part of the pandemic, when I was feeling really isolated, I would go out before work in the morning and just take pictures of flowers in my neighborhood and really train myself to see what was happening. Because even though life kind of stank, it was still springtime and there was a lot going on, and that exercise was helpful. Somebody asked what kind of flowers. Oh my God. Everything from snowdrops, the beginning, roses, and hyacinths, all kinds of stuff. If you send me an email, I can send you 100 flower pictures. Be happy to do that. And for many people, the way you make a super highway is by repetition. So how do you make yourselves do this? For some people, it's journaling. I know people who, at the end of the day, write down 3 things they're grateful for. For other people, it's meditation. It's just sitting there, giving yourself permission and time and space to relax, to slow down, and to concentrate on breathing and focus. All of those things are really important. One of the things that we know from brain development is doing it every day. Developing that routine is really important. And it can be an important aspect of self-care for us during times when we're exposed to our own situation and certainly through our work to vicarious trauma. And finally, we want to invite you to share stories of hope and inspiration. I don't know what it's like with your friends and acquaintances, but sometimes we get into this thing of, well, you think that's bad. Let me tell you about what I heard, or I'm more worried than you are about this, and all of those things. But every once in a while, if you can bring some of the beauty that we see and some of the hope and inspiration, and remembering that your own story matters, each of our stories matter. And so speaking as well as listening, it can really be transformative. And I've learned that from other people and try to emulate it. I'm not sure how good I am, but it's a worthwhile practice to get into. If you have stories, we'd love for you to share them, and we'll try to put this in the chat. It's in the chat box. We love some of the stories that you shared. We have a new webpage for their stories of hope, inspiration, similar to the exercise we did at the beginning. And please share, and we'd be happy to have more and more of those. And you'll get, you can copy that website right from the chat box if you like. So the call to action is I'd like everyone to practice hope, to think about seeing the positive, seeing beauty, making a daily practice that tunes you in so you can create this type 1 thinking, this fast thinking that gets you to see the positive as easily as all of our training has taught us to see the risks and deficits and problems. And remember, our own stories matter. And that goes for us, it goes for people we supervise, and it goes for the families that we serve. Just understanding that these stories are important. So I want to leave you with sort of the principles of integrating hope into trauma-informed care. You begin with awareness. Childhood memories matter. Childhood memories of trauma matter. Childhood memories of an adult who cared for me, even though my home situation was really a disaster, also matters. The first part of our talk today, we talked about about healing. It's important for people who have experienced trauma to know that history is not destiny, that we are capable of healing, we're capable of overcoming that. And for many people, they may need help doing that, whether it's informal support or support from psychologists or such. You really need to do that because you can heal, and it's worthwhile. And finally, and boy, I have to say this now, we're all busy inventing better ways to live. So when I recall my own childhood, I have no guidance on what to do during a pandemic. But for everybody, if they're thinking back to their own childhood and there are things they don't like, every single one of us has to invent new ways to live and be a parent. Technology changes, our community changes, the world changes. So they're not the first ones, and they won't be the last ones to have to reinvent things. And they don't have to repeat the painful experiences that they or we had. So I'd like to leave you with an invitation to stay connected on our positiveexperience.org website to share your story. There's another website that we're part of a community called the ACEs Connection. And most of all, and I think that through Roger and the Children's Trust in Idaho, you can do this. Stay hopeful. Think about the SMART aim you set for yourself, the 5 ideas that you had earlier, the stories that you've heard, and use this as a way to transform the organizations that you work in so that we can have an organization that's strength-based, that's family-centered, that's based on equity, and can really dramatically improve the effectiveness of all the work we're trying to do. So with that, you all, from the very first minute when we did that Mentimeter to now, you've given me a lot of reason for hope, and thank you for the honor of being with you and being able to lead these discussions with you.
Thanks, Bob. Let's clap. I don't know. Can people clap?
Thank you, Andrew.
or the reflection, or the whatever you call those things, reactions. Yeah, cool. Thanks for all of this. I know everybody was really inspired and moved by it and learned a lot and all of that. So I know we are happy about that. I want to send people off quick. So tomorrow morning, same time, same station, we have workshops that is starting we'll all start together at, between 8:30 and 9, with official start at 8:45, 7:45 Pacific. Come in early, do some chatting. I think that's really useful to all of us. There is an evaluation. So if you can get on the Padlet and do the evaluations, we really, really, really would appreciate it. It really helps us to know, how this did affect people, and it will help Dr. Sege too to know how his presentations are, and as he brings them out to other places around the country, maybe we can give him some advice about things he could do better, even that, I know I like that.
Yeah, I definitely rely on that.
Myself when I do training. So it is at the bottom of the Padlet for day 1 of the conference, which is today, Wednesday. And we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Anything else I need to tell anybody, Taryn, or anything?
Just that the Padlet really refer to, Lori should have sent all of you the Padlet. And so when you want the link to get in tomorrow, that's on the Padlet as well. It's also right there in the chat box. And that'll get you started for tomorrow.
And if you have questions, if there's any things that are not working for you in terms of all this stuff, email us. I think Taryn said she was a flag taker, but any of us you can reach any of us. Bob, sorry you're not going to be with us tomorrow, and but for the rest of everybody, tomorrow should be as great as today.
Great, thank you so much.
So thanks everyone. Go have lunch, do whatever you do. Enjoy your afternoon. Actually, we can get started today, can't we? Because we have afternoon. Everybody has an afternoon after this conference. So,
great. So get started. Write your smart aims.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thanks again. Bye all. Thanks, Carrie.